Hello. Today, on behalf of Renfrewshire Libraries, I'd like to welcome Lesley Benzie to share some of her insights and her take on National Poetry Day's theme of vision. Lesley Benzie originally hails from Aberdeen. She's lived in Glasgow for 25 plus years, working and raising a family. Lesley says initially her Aberdonian vernacular was a novelty and impetus for her writing. Following publications in 2 anthologies, she was awarded a Scottish Arts Council bursary. From then, over the years, her writing has come on leaps and bounds. Since her work featured initially, she's had stuff published in various magazines, done many public readings all over the world, and in 2000, after the publication of her first poetry collection, Sewn Up, she's latterly had her latest collection published, titled Fessin, and this comes from Seahorse Publications, a vibrant new publisher that's on the scene. So, I'd like to say, welcome Lesley.
Hi, my name is Lesley Benzie, and I'm a poet. I was born and brought up in Aberdeen, so some of my poetry I write in Aberdonian Doric, but I also have lived in Glasgow for many decades, and so some of my poetry is also in English. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of vision in my writing. Obviously, as a poet, you are very much writing about everything you see around you. That might be nature, it might be people, it might be international events, political events, but you're also talking about how you particularly see the world. So poems rely on, to some extent, good images, the detail of what you see, but you're not just writing to demonstrate what you're seeing, you're writing to evoke a sense of the meaning of what you're seeing, what you feel. You're writing Sometimes you're writing about what you see to question the motives of the people who might be behind certain acts, certain political behaviours, and as well as relying on your vision in terms of images, you're looking at words from a very particular perspective so that you can choose the language that you think best portrays what you're trying to say, that evokes the sort of sense of a moment, that evokes all of your senses in terms of what you're trying to evoke in the reader. And I guess a lot of the time your vision and the way you look at the world and the way you feel about the world is also portrayed through the language, but also the images and the similes and the metaphors that you choose to express, whether it's feelings or thoughts. I've selected some quotes I think that for me reflect something really good about how to express what the purpose of poetry is, and you know, defines it to some degree. And I've chosen poems of mine to read today that I think go along with these quotes to some extent. So I'm going to share some of those quotes with you before I then read my poems. Hopefully, if I share the screen, it's going to work. So bear with me. Okay, so I've chosen 5 quotes, although I'm only going to do 4 poems, and that's mainly because of the time factor here. But this first quote is poetry is the lifeblood of rebellion, revolution, and the raising of consciousness. And that's a quote that I can really relate to. It's by Alice Walker, an American novelist, poet, and social activist. And some people sometimes think of poetry that's about rhyming, and it's all about beautiful landscapes and flowers, and that might be true of some poems, but for me, poetry has the power to help people to see things more clearly and evoke certain feelings, and that quote rings true. The first poem that I'm going to share with you is called Fessin in the vernacular, and Fessin is the Doric word for reared in the vernacular, and that's because I was born and brought up very much into a working class family who spoke broad Aberdonian. But the poem itself, I think, is quite well defined by W.H. Auden's quote, which is, "Poetry might be defined as the clear expression of mixed feelings." I think that's a wonderful quote, and quite often poems do have a mixture of feelings, sometimes conflicting feelings, that are embedded in the poem, and actually the best way to resolve those feelings is through a poem. The next one is, "Poetry is language at its most distilled and most powerful." So sometimes you're looking very carefully at every word you write in order to say the most, but with the least words. And that sometimes might rely heavily on one or two visual images. And then the next quote is, "A good poem is a contribution to reality. The world is never the same once a good poem has been added to it. A good poem helps to change the shape of the universe, helps to extend everyone's knowledge of," well, I'm going to say, themselves and the world around them. And that was Dylan Thomas's quote, a Welsh poet. And this is a really beautiful quote, I think. "Poetry and beauty are always about making peace. When you read something beautiful, you find coexistence. It breaks down walls." And that was by Mahmoud Darwish. He was regarded as the Palestinian national poet, and it's a wonderful quote from him, given precisely the situation of the Palestinians at the moment, and for what has been for a long time. But I think what he's trying to say is, if you find something beautiful that you can relate to, even if in intellectual terms you don't agree with that person, if you can relate to that, you can find it beautiful. It does break down walls. It means you're more open to what that person has to say, which is a lovely quote about poetry, I think. So I'm going to start off with my poem that I mentioned earlier, which is called Fessin in the Vernacular. And first of all, I'm going to try and get myself back to full screen. Oh, I have to stop screen sharing first, and that will work. Sorry about that. So, Fessin in the Vernacular. At times, life can be a North Sea wave bracken o'er me, cauld and hard like a fist I'm nae quick enough to sidestep. Like lost loves, it taks my breath awa, and I'm soaked through, unable to cling to the parts of me nae shaped by the harshness. At others, I'm a dreich island landscape, shot through with the strength of slate grey dense volcanic rock, the dark violet sky circling our head. The day I took you past the Fitty Bar, my da's favourite, for my family congregated to bid him his last. There's een o' them wide blue skies, turning the sea a deep blue-green like his een. You mock my accent that shifts back and forth fae Glasgow, my spiritual hame, and back to Aberdeen, like the wee waves lapping at our taes. Despite the charged sea life smell, just the same the salt smirks our kisses, and I'm grateful for it a'. and that ancient ability to think from a heart. So that's a poem, I guess, that has a lot of mixed feelings in it, and hopefully it's been reasonably well expressed. This next poem is, I suppose, for me, encapsulates the idea of using visual images, but in the visual images you're trying to reflect a series of emotions. And this is just from me being in a small garden at a friend's house, and it's called Dwarf Pear. The tiny bare bosk pear drops from the tree, landing effortlessly on the white wrought iron table. Smooth, plump bottom caught in the crisscross of the lattice work, narrowing at its waist and to its slender neck, topped by a pert stalk, reaching to find its place in the world. Its blush of russet freckles and golden colour heightened against the white weave, connecting the lattice table to the plants and pear trees here in this walled garden, breathing out their oxygen, me breathing it in, capturing the moment of beauty for the times when I can only put one foot in front of the other and need to remember there is still life. So I hope that kind of reflects well on some of the visuals and the detailed in the visual images that I guess are important for reflecting the world in poems. This next poem is literally almost a kind of wording of something that I observed when I was on a beach in last summer, and it's called Still the World Turns. He danders fae the azure blue sea to his place on the beach. He smooths his blonde designer hairstyle back to make sure it's as sharp wheat as it is dry. He tucks the edges of his fluorescent green shorts up into the inner netting to keep his manhood dressed on the recht side of propriety while revealing an extra length of thigh. He finds the recht angle for the sun to shine on him as so he can drip himself dry, turning a rune and a rune and a rune like meat on a spit, while he examines ilky inch to ensure he's bruning to perfection. He strokes his abdomen for the flesh joins the bones or the hips, lingering at the hollows, shaped like an inverted cello's F-holes, as he slips his fingertips just inside his waistband, while his wife sits in the shade, tending to their wee daughter. When he's finally ready to bask, he muscles in, and a thought of masking, she applies sun lotion to his back. He checks his own reflection in his mirrored sunglasses afore placing them on his upturned nose, then stretches out on the tulle draped across his lounger, putting his hands ahin his head, so as much of him is exposed to the world that he fancies revolves around him. So my final poem, I think, reflects Alice Walker's quote about it being about rebellion and politics and revolution. And the final poem is a poem called Burning Bush. And it's a poem I wrote at the latest, as a reaction to the latest massive bushfires in Australia. And folk might ask why Australia, but I've spent a couple of times there, one for 5 months, so I feel a real sort of affection for the places that I visited and stayed at when I was there. So this is called Burning Bush. In its twa largest cities, the inhabitants choke as if they a' have a 30-a-day habit, and the reed-hot glow igniting the sky can still be seen through the plumes o' thick smoke fae millions o' acres o' burning bush. but there's nae a voice fae God instructing him to lead his people to safety. Instead, fae his sunbed in Hawaii, he evokes the sacred Aussie spirit that has enabled them to endure through calamity and bushfires such as these afore, while he tries to pour water on all the evidence that there has never been bushfires such as these, and denies the blueprint for land management died in the bones of the country's first people, fa brocht fire for the centre of the earth, for our humans were cast in black, reed, yalla and fight in harmony with nature. And despite smallpox and cruelty like they had never seen, have preserved their cultural fires in sanglines and walkabouts that began 60,000 years ago in the dream time. As if half asleep, he repeats, now is not the time to talk about climate change, for the kingmakers o' coal whisper in his dreams about the billions of reasons that he needs to put his country's economy and jobs first. An ally himself, we are them fa allege that it's a conspiracy theory concocted by the loony urban elites, that we are in the same arc of this universe. As each national leader competes for their country to be first, to consume the earth's finite resources, to fuel the lifestyle to which the God of free trade says they are entitled, while a source of year-round renewable energy beats down on their heads, empty o' conscience. For this time it's only a few tens of folk that have died, and tens of hundreds of homes that have burned, their atmosphere stinging with the singed flesh and fur o' reed kangaroos, emus and koalas, which are among the billion animals fried in the scorched trees that money doesn't grow on. So thanks very much for listening to me. These were poems that are in my latest collection of poetry called Fessin. I hope that you've found something of meaning for yourselves in them. And just like to say goodbye and stay safe.